Kia ora class. Today we're going to be looking at the skeletal system, aka the bones. Our learning intention for today is that we are going to identify and name the major bones of the skeletal system and describe two important joint types for performance. Now we're going to start with the function of the skeletal system, or the bones. There are four major functions you need to know about. 1. Protection. The bones have a really important job of protecting some of the squishy, more vulnerable, but still important internal organs. For example, your ribs act like an armor plate around your chest for your heart and lungs, and your skull acts like a helmet to protect your brain. Shape and support. Bones, the skeletal system, is the framework, the structure that the rest of your body is built around. It provides the support for everything else to be assembled and held together. Movement. Bones are really important for movement. They are what our muscles pull on and work with to enable us to move and perform. And lastly, blood production. Red and white blood cells are actually produced in the bone marrow inside some of our larger bones, like the ribs, humerus, and femur. Now onto the bones you need to know. You can see here in the top sort of head section of the body, I've labeled the cranium, which is the large curved spherical part of your head inside which your brain lives. You've got the maxilla, which is the bone that sort of makes up the front of your face. And lastly, you have the mandible, which is your jawbone. Looking at the torso now, you can see in the middle of the body is the sternum. It's a bone that sort of attaches to all your ribs, which you can see go around the sides there. You can see running right up your back, making up your spine, are your vertebrae. We have a few of these in the body that go together to make the spinal column. And down the bottom there, you can see we have the pelvis. You can see the big curved bits at the top there. They're actually bits you can feel. If you put your hands on your hips, that's the bone you're feeling underneath. Looking at the arms and shoulder now, we have the clavicle, also called the collarbone, sits right in here and goes across to the top of the shoulder. We have the scapula or shoulder blade, which sits on the back of your torso, on the posterior. We have the humerus, which is the bone in the upper arm. And then in the lower arm, you can see we have the radius and the ulna. The radius is the bone which sits on the same side as your thumb. So regardless of where your arm is positioned, the radius is the one that runs down from your thumb to your elbow, and the ulna will be on the underside of that. Okay. You can see that the wrist and hand are made up of the carpal bones, the metacarpals in the hand, in the fleshy part of your hand, and the phalanges, which make up your fingers. To the lower body now. The largest bone in the human body is the femur, or your thigh bone, your upper leg. You can see a little bone in the middle there called the patella. That's your kneecap. The main bone in your lower leg is your tibia, or your shin bone, and then there is a little supporting bone next to it called the fibula. In the feet, you can see there is a similar structure to the hands, starting in the ankle with the metatarsals, then in your feet, the fleshy part of your feet, the tarsals, and lastly the phalanges, or your toes. We're going to quickly look at some joint types now that allow for movement and performance. They're two really important varieties. Where two bones meet, we see a structure called joint. Some joints allow for movement, others fix bones together with very little movement. The bones that come together to form a joint are called the articulating bones. So if we were talking about the elbow, we would say the articulating bones are the radius, the ulna, and the humerus. They are the bones that make up that joint. There are two joint types you need to know about. One is the ball and socket joint. This is like a round ball-like end fitting into a cup or socket-like structure at the other side. So one bone has the curved part, the spherical ball, and the other is the cup. Okay. This allows for a very large range of motion. As you can see with a ball and a cup, this can move in all sorts of directions. Yeah, so it allows for a lot of range of motion. The shoulder and the hip are both examples of this. If you imagine your shoulder, the humerus has a ball on the end which sits in a cup and can move around in quite a lot of planes of motion. The next type of joint you need to know about is a hinge, and this operates just like a hinge on a door. It only allows an opening and a closing motion, just that one plane of motion. It just opens and closes. The knee and the elbow are both good examples of this joint because they can just open and close. In summary, we have identified and named the major bones of the skeletal system and described two types of joints that are important for performance.